One of the most common questions that I get asked about Turo are what cars are the best cars for a Turo fleet. And while I've done a ton of videos talking about my favorite cars for Turo, what cars I think are solid investments, which cars I'm buying, I haven't really talked and discussed a whole lot about which cars I think are the best first cars to start with Turo. If you're beginning a Turo fleet in 2024 and you're starting with your very first car, what type of car would I recommend? And so in this video, I'm going to be diving into just that. I'm going to be talking about the key components that you should be keeping in mind if you are starting a Turo fleet this year, and some of the cars that you should avoid, as well as some of the ones that you should look into. But before we dive into that, I do want to remind you guys that I have a course, the Car Sharing Masterclass, that teaches you how to start and scale a car sharing fleet with the exact same business model that I use. The Car Sharing Masterclass is full of over 7 hours of course content that teaches you everything that you need to know about car sharing, from how to determine which cars are the right ones to buy, how to buy and find below market value deals, how to streamline and make your fleet as semi-passive as possible, how to handle damage claims, incidentals, insurance, business and LLC information, accounting, total losses, and everything in between. Not only that, but whenever you sign up for the Car Sharing Masterclass, you also get access to our private Discord where myself, my husband HP, and our members are in there on a daily basis discussing all things car sharing. And we also host monthly Zoom calls where all of the hosts and members can connect to answer each other's questions and help each other grow. The best part is I am so incredibly confident about the quality of education that you'll receive with the Car Sharing Masterclass that we offer a 30-day robust, no questions asked, money-back guarantee. That way you can join the masterclass at no risk to you. And if you're interested in checking out the course for yourself, you can use the link down in the description below, and you can use the code OFFER100 to get $100 off. Now, if you've seen my channel before, you know that I am in general a big proponent of paying for cars in cash for Turo. And the reason for this is that it results in more profit margin, less risk, and more flexibility. For example, you don't pay a monthly loan payment or interest payments. If the car is in an accident and sits for a month, you're not responsible for a car payment while it sits, and it gives me comfort in knowing that no matter what happens, I'm not a bad month away from being in a tough spot. But I also recognize that paying for your first Turo car in cash isn't doable for everyone, and not being able to pay for your car in cash shouldn't hold you back from starting a Turo fleet either. And so for the sake of this video, we're going to make the assumption that whoever's watching this and taking this advice doesn't have $4,000 to $7,000 in order to spend on a cash car to buy it outright. Now, when it comes to cash cars versus finance cars, many hosts believe that there is some sort of ideal ratio that you should use in order to find the right balance, where there is just the right amount of risk, but not too much risk. For example, maybe for every one finance car that you have 5 cars that you've paid for in cash. Now, this is just an example, and I don't actually know what the perfect ratio is. It's going to depend on a number of factors, including your personal financial situation, your risk tolerance, what types of cars you have, your emergency fund situation, as well as a slew of other factors. But I do think that it's a good idea to have some sort of ratio in mind for you to sit down and really think, okay, how many finance cars do I feel comfortable buying compared to how many cash cars I own? And having that ratio predetermined is a really good idea in order to make sure that you continue to make money, that you aren't taking on too much risk, and that you're able to grow consistently and sustainably. But whether you're financing your first Turo car or you're paying for that car in cash, there are 3 key components that you should absolutely be keeping in mind for that first vehicle purchase. And these 3 components include reliability, mass appeal, and below market value. Oh, and make sure to buy used. If you're buying your first Turo car, don't even think about buying new. First is reliability. As you grow your Turo fleet and you have a lot of cars that are self-sustaining your fleet, you can experiment with less reliable cars. For example, I used to own a Maserati, I currently own a Kia and a Fiesta, 3 cars that I advise people not to buy for your first car. But whenever you're buying your first Turo car, getting a car that's reliable is absolutely crucial. And not doing this will result in not only costly repairs and lost revenue, but it could also result in net losses that cause you to have to go into your own pocket in order to pay for those repairs. Not only that, but for your very first Turo car, you want to make sure that your car is being rented out as often as possible. And in order to be rented, your car has to be active and not in the repair shop. So you want to make sure that your car is in good health, it's reliable, and it's able to be rented out consistently, because that will then put money in your pocket that you can then invest into other vehicles. For these reasons, cars that I would stay away from for your first car are Kias, BMWs, Mercedes, Audis, Ford Fiestas, Nissans. Really, any of the cars that you can find for some of the cheapest prices are some of the vehicles that I would avoid buying altogether. Because that $3,500 Ford Fiesta that's listed on Facebook Marketplace Yeah, that's not worth buying because in a couple of months, it could need a multi-thousand-dollar transmission repair. Or that Kia that's listed for $4,000 could be out for a recall next month. Or that $5,000 Audi, yeah, these cars are cheap for a reason, and I highly encourage you to avoid them. A tried and true car is Toyota. Toyota for a Turo fleet is a safe bet, but if you have a different brand that you really love and you know how to work on, that could be a good bet as well. For example, Fords in general are nowhere near as reliable as Toyotas, but we still buy them in our fleet because my husband HP is very, very comfortable working on Fords. And so the fact that these cars are less reliable, it's compensated by the fact that he's very knowledgeable of them. So if you have a car that you feel extremely comfortable working on, this is a car that I would consider buying. The point is, getting a car that's reliable is absolutely crucial, and for that first Turo car, I wouldn't settle for anything less, even if that meant that I had to pay a higher price. Next is mass appeal. I don't care what the arguments are for buying luxury cars, exotic cars, because while I don't recommend buying those types of cars, and I have 100 reasons why, all of these arguments for buying these cars get thrown out the window whenever you're talking about your first Turo car. Because for your first Turo car, the name of the game is mass appeal. You do not want a niche vehicle for your first car. Many Turo hosts buy cars that match the travel industry associated with their market. A convertible in a beach town, a 3-row SUV for family vacations, or a Jeep in the mountains. And there's absolutely validity to this approach. If you live in a tourist area, you should definitely take advantage of that. But for the very first Turo car, I would argue that what's even more important is going with a vehicle that everybody will want to rent. Not only tourists, but also locals as well. This means that instead of buying a vehicle that will attract that bachelorette party that's coming into town, you'll instead buy that vehicle that a family may need whenever their car's in the shop, or for a person that's traveling into town that's looking for a normal car for a good price. By going after a mass appeal vehicle, not only do you create a broader audience for your car, but it also means that you'll be able to avoid a lot of the ebbs and flows that comes with being in the tourist industry. So you're not going to have those hot and cold seasons that you would if you're targeting spring breakers or winter skiers or summer vacationers. There's a lot more consistency whenever you're targeting everyone. And again, I'm not saying that you shouldn't target the tourists in your market. I think that it's a great idea to do this, and I encourage anyone who's starting a Turo fleet to really dive into your market and see what needs need to be met, and this includes tourists. But I think for your very first car, choosing mass appeal is a much better option. And last but not least, and I would argue the most important factor with your very first Turo car, is buying used and buying below market value. Do not, under any circumstances, buy a new car for Turo. I am adamantly against buying new cars for Turo, but I am even more so against this if you are buying your very first car for Turo and you're a brand new host. Do not, under any circumstances, buy a new or even slightly new car if you're a brand new to Turo and this is your first vehicle. It is a huge mistake, and it could be the biggest one that you make in this business. And the reason why you shouldn't buy a new or slightly new comes down to one key reason: depreciation. Whenever you're first getting started with Turo and you're buying that first car, there are a lot of unknowns. You don't know how you're going to like Turo. You don't know how your car is going to perform, how it meshes with your lifestyle, with your market. There are simply so many different questions that you don't have the answer to yet. And what happens if you buy your first Turo car, you list it out for a few months, and you decide that this just isn't the business model for you? Or alternatively, you decide that you actually love Turo, but after 4 months, your car gets totaled. Well, if this scenario plays out and you buy a new car, then you could stand to lose 30 to 40% of that car's value in the blink of an eye. There is a way to be able to buy a car for Turo, list it on the Turo platform, and not lose any money on the actual car when you do that. And you do this by buying heavily depreciated below market value vehicles, or at the very least below market value. For example, 2 years ago, I bought this Toyota Yaris for $5,300. I had it on Turo for 2 years, and this month it was totaled, and when it was totaled, I was paid out $6,500. I got paid out $1,200 to own this car, and I made money on it every single month. But the thing is, this doesn't just apply to older, lower-end cars. It can also apply to newer cars as well. Another example is my Maserati Ghibli. I paid about $30,000 for my Maserati Ghibli, and when it was totaled 6 months later, I was paid out $32,000. So we got paid $2,000 to own this car, not to mention the fact that we made money on it while we owned it as well. This is obviously harder to do with newer cars because newer cars just haven't depreciated as much as older cars, but if you are buying a car for Turo, especially if it's your first vehicle, you want to find a car that has already had the bulk of its depreciation. There are a few newer cars that fit this description. For example, the Maserati is one of the best examples, but there are other cars like Lincoln Navigators, some Cadillacs, Teslas. These cars that have been tanking in depreciation could be good bets, assuming that they're close to their depreciation bottom, which means that they're not going to depreciate much more than than where they currently are. But this is much easier to do with older cars because they've had much longer to depreciate. A 12-year-old car is going to have a lot less to fall depreciation-wise than a 5-year-old or 6-year-old car. For example, a 2012 Mazda 3, if I buy that car for $4,500, I know that that car is pretty dang close to its depreciation bottom, and if I buy that car today, run it on Turo for a year, and it was to get totaled, I will most likely either break even or make money off of that total loss because the car isn't going to depreciate any more than it already has. Now, in order to determine whether or not a car is below market value, there are a few things that you can keep in mind. Number one is just what cars are being listed for. You'll learn this by simply looking on third-party platforms like Facebook, Cars.com, AutoTrader. You'll begin to get a sense of what cars are actually worth based off of what they're being listed for and what they're selling for. But one of the best methods is to refer to KBB. Whenever you have a total loss on Turo, Turo typically pays out the KBB value set to excellent plus an additional 8 to 10%. So I know, for example, that if a car has a KBB value of $6,000 and I'm buying that car for $4,500, I know that there's a high likelihood that I'll be able to make a profit off of that car if I need to sell it or if it gets totaled. And that's kind of the gauge that I use in order to look at whether or not a car is a true below market value find. And typically I'll look for a car that's anywhere between 10 to 20% below that KBB value, if not lower than that. And one of the best ways to find below market value, heavily depreciated cars is through Facebook Marketplace. And I've talked about this a lot in my videos. Finding cars where the seller isn't putting a whole lot of effort into the listing, the photos kind of suck, listings that were just recently listed, these can oftentimes be great indicators that you can get a good deal. And of course, offering cash and telling the seller that you can come today is just icing on the cake. And again, while I most commonly talk about this business model and these types of cars in the context of older cars like 2012 year models, you can find these with newer cars as well. For example, just last month, I purchased a Tesla Model 3 Performance for $26,000, and the KBB value of this car was about $31,000. So I purchased it for between $4,000 and $5,000 below market value, and this deal was found on Facebook. Or recently, we looked at a 2013 Toyota Yaris that unfortunately was sold before we could actually get to the car, but this car was sold for $3,000 below market value, and the seller was selling it for his sister. So there wasn't a ton of effort put into the sale, which means whoever bought it got a stellar deal. By buying below market value, heavily depreciated vehicles, you give yourself the flexibility and freedom to do whatever you want with Turo. Not only do you leave room for yourself to make more profit if something does happen like a total loss, but you also aren't stuck and tied to Turo if you decide that you don't like it, because you're not going to be underwater on a car, and thus if you decide that Turo isn't for you, you can simply sell the car and walk away. And again, this can apply whether you buy the car in cash or not, because below market value deals are everywhere whether you finance a car or pay for cash. For example, in the case of the Maserati Ghibli, we actually financed that vehicle. We did not pay cash for it. And so once that car was totaled, we were able to pay down the loan and have more money in our pocket afterwards. But truthfully, to me, the formula for success on Turo comes down to these three components: reliability, mass appeal, and below market value, heavily depreciated vehicles. And I think that if you do this, your chances of success on Turo are so much higher than somebody who doesn't follow these steps, especially for your first car. But like always, you guys, I hope that you enjoyed this video. If you have any questions, comments, if you have anything to add, I would love to hear it, so make sure to leave a comment down below. And while you guys are at it, make sure to hit the like button, hit that subscribe button, and hit the notification bell, and I will see you guys in the next video.